All right.
Okay, yeah. So welcome everyone. I'm glad everyone came out tonight and everyone is online. Tonight we have Zach Hall. He's going to be giving a presentation on FreePBX and in particular PyPBX, as I understand it. I'm hoping y'all can hear me okay. Is that good for you, Ben?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great. So so welcome to both here, Upstate Carolina Linux Users Group, Columbia Linux Group, everyone in Columbia, and online South Carolina Linux Users Groups. So Zach, I'll let you take it away. Thanks a lot.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out and for tuning in online. Let's get going. So today I'm going to be giving you a pretty brief history of telephony. I'm going to be explaining what a private branch exchange is and how I built one in my house and how I used a Raspberry Pi to do it all, and a few different things that you can do with such a system. So why am I talking about this? Essentially, a few years ago, I installed a hotel-grade phone system in my house. And I've got phones, as you can see over here. If you're online, I guess it's hard for you to see these, but I'll just hold them up to the camera. So I've got phones like these. They are phones that are in actual hotels. I got them on eBay, and I installed them in every single room of my house.
What is this that I'm holding?
This is a cordless phone. It's similar to it. It's an IP phone as well. And this one as well, I'll hold it up to the camera here, is an old dial phone. And I got all of them working on the same system together. And as you can see over here, I've got my GPG keys on a floppy disk, so good luck stealing them. Physical security, I've got a TV remote for my TV project, but I got a lot of old school stuff in my house, basically. And what have I been able to do with it? Well, I can do multi-room calls, so I can like call downstairs. I can say, hey, is dinner ready? Or, I can call upstairs, hey, everybody, dinner's ready, I can make announcements throughout the house. I can use my PC as a client for this. I can use, my Mac. I can plug it into my phone, my iPhone, so that I can be on like a real phone call on a phone number while I'm gaming. I can just loop the audio in. I could use this for wake-up calls. So in my guest room, I've got like the ability to tap a button to say when you want to wake up, because it is a hotel-grade system. And I could even view security camera footage for all my different security cameras on the phone. So like if I want to see what's going on downstairs, I press a button, and then on this screen up here, it'll show what's happening on my security cameras. So the inspiration for all this and the reason that I decided to do it has something to do with my coworker Alex over there told me about this book called Ghost in the Wires by Kevin Mitnick. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he's one of the famous computer hackers. And they were talking about how a lot of people back in the day got their start, and it was through devices called blue boxes, which you probably have heard about before. This group probably has heard about, but if you haven't, this is a picture of one. And it generates these two-tone signals that, and this one called a 2600 hertz tone. And what it would do is when you press the button, it would generate this tone, and it would tell the long-distance equipment that AT&T was using at the time that your call was like finished and you were trying to connect to somewhere else. So you'd call somebody to press this button, it would confuse the equipment, and then you could use that to make long distance calls for free. And long distance calls were expensive back then. Like you'd call people up and, it was like $50 to make like a single phone call. And it may not seem like it, because inflation stuff, but it was crazy expensive. So people were trying to use it to make free calls. But then there were a lot of people who were just trying to do it for fun. Like people figured out that there's a whistle that you could use in Captain Crunch cereal box that would generate a tone that's almost the same, like 2600 hertz. And so they'd use that. These little kids would blow the whistle, and then they start dialing on the phone, and they'd reach all sorts of other places like test numbers or outside lines, maintenance, operators, or the operators, and all sorts of different things. But that's not the book that I have pictured here. The book I have pictured here is one that I found out about under recommended books after I finished Ghost in the Wires. This one's called Exploding the Phone by Phil Lapsley, and it's probably my favorite book. It is so interesting. I shared it around to some of my coworkers, and they also found it pretty cool. But it's a book about all the goes way into detail about the phones and the freaks, as they called them, PHREKS. And these guys they were all the kids, teenagers, and young adults who were just going around, screwing around with the phone network. And like the FBI were after these guys. It was crazy. It sounded like a really cool time to live in, but I never lived in it. So anyways, I learned about all that, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. But then what actually inspired me, hey, can I put a system like this in my house, is this weird looking phone here. It's not actually a phone, but what it is it's the device that you see on airplanes. So when the flight attendants are ready for takeoff and they're, telling everybody to put their overhead bins and, their luggage in their overhead bins and all that stuff, they're talking on this device. And they just pick it up off the wall. And I was always wondering, I was like, can I buy one of those for my house? Yeah, I'm a little bit weird, but, I'm a bit of a nerd. We're all a bit of a nerd, but I was like, can I buy this thing for my house and just press a button and start talking and being like, hey, everybody, I want to make an announcement, and then every room in my house, I could hook it into my speaker system. No, you can't do that. But it's a completely closed system. But this thing isn't. This is a completely open system, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. But before I get to that, let's start with a real brief history of the entire history of telephony. I promise this isn't going to be very much because it's only a 10-minute presentation or longer. So, in the world before cell phones, we had landlines, and you might remember them looking a little bit like this. But if we go back a little bit, they look more like this, or like that, or like this. I mean, they look kind of primitive back then, but this isn't even its final form. Take a look at this guy. This was the original telephone you'd have in your house. Note there's no dial. So what you'd do, you'd pick up the earpiece, you'd be listening in, and you'd just wait for the operator. You'd hope that they weren't on break. So the operator picks up your call, and look at this crazy headset that she's wearing. Imagine going on Xbox Live with that thing. But if she wasn't on break, she'd ask you, hey, who are you going to call? And so you'd tell them, hey, I want to talk to Jimbo or something like that. And she'd look around, be like, this is where he lives. And on the switchboard anyways, she'd pick up her 1/4-inch headphone jack, which was around, and then minified, and then Apple killed it. So courageous, But anyways, that's what that was originally designed for. You'd plug it into this switchboard. And take a look at this switchboard. Look at all those connections. Like every one of those is a phone number. And the question I have here to you guys is, what's wrong with this picture? It's a bunch of teenage boys. Now, if you know anything about operators, pretty much all of them are women, right? And they were all women. So why is this picture showing teenage boys? It's because originally, and I learned this in this book, they hired teenage boys to do all this connecting, and they were rude. They were swearing at people. They'd connect you to the wrong people on purpose because they thought it was funny. They'd just jerk you around all the time, and they were just not taking their job seriously. So they threw all the boys out, and then they brought in women, and that's how all the operators were female, because they took their job more seriously. I never knew that until I looked at that book. But take a look at these roller skates that she's wearing. They aren't for fun. They are serious tools of the job, because look at how long that switchboard is. They need to run around with cables, literally running around scurrying around trying to plug these cables in, trying to connect you to the right people. And as the number of phones got bigger and bigger, and you had big cities and stuff, that wasn't sustainable. And so we knew, hey, there needs to be a better way of doing this. We can't just have 1 million people going to 1 billion different switches. So in comes automation. And if you played Factorio, I got my little engineer there. But how'd we do it? We did it with something called this. It's called the Stroger switch. And I don't really know how this thing works, but I've seen a video of it, and I can't really show it here because of copyright and stuff. I'm being recorded. But the way that this works is that every single phone number in town will be connected to one of these switches. And when you pick up the phone off hook, all these switches would also be connected to each other. Can you see that all right? Okay, yeah. So all the stuff would be connected to one of those switches, and you'd take the phone off hook, and you'd start dialing a number, and say it was like 54321 or something. So you'd pull it over here to the 5, let go, and when it does that, what it does is it sends electrical pulses down the wire in the back of the phone. So every time that you'd release this lever, it would send that many electrical pulses. So 5, 9, and that's why it would take such a long time, because it would be traveling back to, this rest area here. And once it rested, it would have all these electrical signals being pulsed for each number, one digit at a time. You couldn't dial, 2 digits at the same time. It was impossible. And this switch would basically pulse every time it received some electricity until it reached the desired number. And then it would connect you to another switch that would go somewhere else. And it would keep on doing that until it got to the last switch. And once it got to the last one, then it would go connect. Oh,
I'm sorry. Ben has a question, I think.
okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hey, Zach. Sorry to interrupt the
Hey, yeah, no worries.
So on the rotary phone, I've heard that the 212 for the New York area code was there because it was the fastest area code that you could dial. How come they couldn't use 111 for the area code?
I don't know. Honestly, I do know that what you're talking about is true, though. I mean, it is why they started off, early with the 3-digit area codes that were closest to the dial, because it was easier to dial. You're right about that, but I don't know. Do you know?
I don't know either.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
What'd they say?
Sure. He said it was the international country code for the United States is +1. And then they would be able to differentiate between an international call and one that wasn't.
Yep. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not a complete expert on. Well, I'm not an expert on any of this, but I find it interesting, But yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And so anyway, you dial this number, and these Stroger switches would connect with your rotary dial to a massive central office, they called it. And each one of these tiny little pixels here is a complete one of those switches there. And so they had this massive machinery, just racks and racks and racks of switches. And well, that was pretty cool and all, but the thing is are we going to have, as we get everybody connected to this system, they got to make it smaller somehow. They can't just keep on building these gigantic offices. And so they're trying to, this was the earliest automation. They reserved a lot of this switching for long distance calls. They didn't do it for, in-town calls at first. Once people started dialing and saying, hey, I want to call from New York all the way over to San Francisco, for instance, that's where they used some of these systems. And it relied on all these pulses and everything like that. So they were trying to figure out how to optimize it. And what they figured out is, instead of having, at first they were going to build like an out-of-band system. They were going to have like another system, a signaling system that wouldn't travel down the same lines as everything else. But they realized, we've laid all these lines everywhere. They're going, copper wires are going into every home. They're going all the way across the US. We can't we got to figure out a way to piggyback off all this stuff. And so they ended up using tones, and touch tone dialing became like a thing because of that. They used the same voice lines for voice as well as the signals. And so that's kind of where the phone freaks figured it out, because like if they had used out of band signaling, if they had like, if all these racks of stuff were connected up and they weren't on the same voice channel, then there'd be no way of doing that. And that's eventually what we got, but you know, it took a while.
The tones they picked were picked because they're outside of the vocal range.
It is. And it's also not likely to be played by any instruments. You know, like they did a lot of research and they published all this information actually. Like, I mean, it wasn't really a trade secret because they were a protected monopoly, you know, but it was basically they published all this information about what they did in the Bell System Technical Journal. And anybody who was like a big enough nerd could go to the library and check all that stuff out and read it. And that's how the phone freaks figured out how all this stuff worked, was because they published it. So when they're saying, oh, this is confidential information, they send the FBI after them. It's like, well, you know, for what, reading a book that was in the local library and figuring out how to use it to your advantage? They didn't exactly keep it secret. So anyways, on to businesses. So this is kind of where we're getting into this territory of all these phones. So now that we know a little bit about how that worked, let's talk about businesses. Say you've got a phone company central office in town, and you've got a law office in town. And the reason I picked law office is because when I was looking this up, these were the first people to use this system because they had lots and lots of phones. And you wanted to have a bunch of lawyers all with phones on their desk. What you needed to do was you needed to not just put one phone line, but you needed to put a whole bunch of phone lines going into that law office. You needed 50 phone lines going over there. They all went from the central office all the way over to the law office. And then you published in your phone book, you know, you want to call the law office, you know, here's the receptionist number, here's every individual lawyer's number. Like, how are you going to know who to call? You know, like, you call Ben Franklin Plumbing or something, they have their phone number 1-800-222-2222 or whatever it is. Or maybe that's National Poison Control, but one of them, you know. But the point is like you try and pick up the phone call, you're not going to know if everybody at that call center has their own phone number. That's not going to work. So, and then also you want to call somebody from here over there, you know, say there's like an office over there and you want to call somebody just to ask them something real quick, you know, let's jump on a call, guys. Well, it's going to go all the way through the central office and back. And that's not good either, you know, because you're being billed for that. And you're being billed at the in-town rate. And so if you try to jump on a call with your coworker and ask them about the latest law stuff or something, you're going to be charged for that. And that's cumbersome. That's inefficient. So they figured out, what are we going to do about that? We're going to bring all this switching stuff inside the law office. And so that's how, and inside all the businesses. And that's how the private branch exchange was born. It's called a PBX. And this is kind of a diagram I found online somewhere, and it explains kind of how it works. So instead of having lines going directly from the central office all the way to every phone, like point to point, you have some equipment in the middle. And I mean, that's more of a modern interpretation of what it looks like. But back in the day, you know, there were big switchboards inside of the law office. So you had your own operators doing all this stuff. And all the lines, you'd still have that same number of telephone lines, but they could share a number as I think that is. You know, I might be wrong about that, but they all shared the same number. You could call it up and it would route you on one of those lines to the law office, and then, you know, they'll answer the phone, be like, hey, who do you want to call? And then they can transfer you instead, or it'll ring one of these many extensions. And if this looks a little bit like an internet router, well, I mean, it is. It's very, very similar. So if you think of the central office as your modem's connection to the internet, and then your router as the switching equipment for the private branch exchange, and instead of the extensions over here, which are all the individual phones on the desk that each had their own phone number, if all these clients here are, you know, your your extensions, all the computers, and they have their own IP address, and that's 192.168.1 dot whatever, and it's behind your NAT, and it goes over there. That's very, very similar to how the private branch exchange works. So similar that when we created voice over IP, it used the same stuff. And so with the, let's see, no, wait a second. I'm going to go back real quick. So the incoming phone lines over here, the connection from your telephone system to the telephone exchange, that is called the trunk. And when I was a kid, I thought it meant this. And I thought it was the trunk of your car. I'd heard of like people who'd done in GitHub and other source control. Before it was master, they call it trunk. And now they call it main. But like originally they called it trunk. And I was wondering, what does that mean? Why is everybody in programming and in telephones so obsessed with cars? And, it's not that at all. You got to think about it like this. It's the private branch exchange. These are tree branches, and that is the trunk. And it made a whole lot more sense to me after I found that out. But the thing is it doesn't need to go, this trunk doesn't need to go directly back to the central office. You can make, using the system I'm going to tell you how to build or, go over anyways, you could make your own private telephone system at your house. You could invite all your friends to connect to it. They'd have their own private system. You'd create routes that route you between them, static routes, basically. It's the same type of networking as you do on the internet, but like you could build your own VPN style phone system and you can invite everybody to join it, and you just all have different branches that happen to be connected. It's a really flexible system. It's pretty cool. So let's talk about PBX equipment. So I got some pictures here. I tried to find the most old school, big, complicated systems I could for these pictures because I want to explain how the Raspberry Pi replaces all that. You know how big the Raspberry Pi is. So, see all these over here? They should be anyways. They may not be, but analog switching systems. So these are in the 80s and 90s and stuff, the types of big racks of equipment that you'd put into your business. And say you had like a school and every classroom had a phone or two in it, then they'd all plug in through the walls, through the cables that are running across the ceiling here, all the way to one of these big racks. And you'd have all your phone systems hooked in there. If you had a hotel, you'd have 500 phone lines coming into one central place. And it was, it's pretty big and bulky and inefficient, but I mean, it's way better than like having gigantic made out of wood Stroger switches everywhere with, things that you gotta plug in here and there and running around. So essentially, we switched from copper wires, in the 90s to Ethernet, and all these systems just got Ethernet ports. I mean, I think those are Ethernet ports. If I look really closely, they are, and they switched from, the regular copper phone lines to Ethernet. And when you wanted to power your phone, you wouldn't plug it into the wall. You'd power it over Ethernet. And really the reason that power over Ethernet came into being in the 90s is because back in the day, all your phones were connected to their own power. They were like the copper lines would also supply the power. And you'd notice in a power outage, your phone would still work a lot of the times because the central office had power going to all your phones. And people would even steal electricity from in a power outage, they'd try to plug in their devices and stuff to the phone company's power lines so they could get their own power from there as a backup, even though it was illegal. But that's why, you didn't need to plug in these phones into power. You just got them over the line. So when they did power over Ethernet, they were trying to replace those one-to-one, and that's kind of how it came into being. Now it's for other things too, security cameras run on power over Ethernet, but originally it was like phones. So that's kind of cool. I remember a few years ago when I had a triple play bundle from AT&T. You guys might still have one, but it gives you home phone service. And you'll notice that AT&T, actually just last week, they discontinued DSL and copper telephone lines. They're getting rid of them. You can't get them anymore. But they've been on their way out forever. Like, you'll notice that fiber is finally becoming available places. But the thing is they're finally getting all that stuff ripped out. But for all new installs for decades at this point, they've been giving you VoIP. And they'd send you, when I got this triple play bundle, I got this mystery box that was really, really heavy in the mail. Happened to be a phone book, but they still make it. But then I also got a mystery box in the mail, really, really heavy. And it was this big lead acid battery. And it's an uninterruptible power supply. I was thinking, oh, sweet, I can use this for my computer, but it has a proprietary plug on the end that can only be plugged into your AT&T router, and you got to send it back at the end. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Great. But that's why they sent those out. It's because they're trying to emulate the fact that we always had power over the phone during an emergency because they supplied it with their own power. Anyways, we're going to get into now how we can do it ourselves. If you want to be your own AT&T, you don't want to have their triple play. You want to do it yourself, but you also want to have your own phone number. So let's go and make our own PBX. Hope you guys are ready for 15 hours of no, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to give you an overview. I'm no expert, and you can read it, and I'll show you how. You'll need a Raspberry Pi. I found this really funny because Microsoft gives you these layouts based on what you type. And when I said you'll need a Raspberry Pi, it's like, how about you use this background? Like, okay, sure. I'll use this background. It's great. So you'll need a Raspberry Pi 2 or later. I think it's pretty easy to find a 2 or later. And you can get an SD card, and you'll flash it with software called RasPBX. Now, what is RasPBX? It is a Linux distribution for the Raspberry Pi that runs a program called FreePBX. And what is FreePBX but a wrapper for another program, which is the one that you guys heard about in 2007 called Asterisk. I'm sure all y'all are here for 2007 because I certainly wasn't. So anyways, is the author of Asterisk here? I heard that he stood up in 2007 and introduced himself, but yeah. No, that is pretty cool, I will say. But
David Nally was one of our members here, and he was giving a presentation on Asterix in 2007. Come to find out, the author of Asterix had come up from Alabama to come to the meeting. He stood up and introduced himself, so it was quite fun.
I'll find out that the author of the Raspberry Pi is here or something like that. Or the creator of this thing. They're 200 years old at this point. But no, anyways. So, yeah, Asterisk is a framework. And this is where I got confused because back in the day, somebody came and presented to me at Furman. They said, hey, you'll love this. It's called Asterisk. You can use it to build your own phone system. And by build, they meant build. You need to write code. You need to know C, you got to know Python, you got to write modules, you got to write configuration files. It made it, I tried to get going with it back at Furman because I was like, oh, this is sweet, but it didn't work. It didn't work at all. And so FreePBX has also been around for a long time, but I didn't know about it. And FreePBX is the main application that's built for Asterisks. When you download Asterisk, you're probably going to be getting FreePBX. And it makes it easy. It gives you a nice swanky admin interface. It gives you, it does a lot of the stuff for you. It writes the configuration files for you. It applies everything for you as long as you remember to manually apply it. It has modules that are built not just for Asterisk, but for FreePBX. So like wake up calls, call transferring, hold music, all the same stuff. It basically plugs into FreePBX, which plugs into Asterisks. But that doesn't mean that if you are like a C wizard, you can't still write stuff and extend Asterisk and extend FreePBX as well. You still can, you just don't need to, which made it like I can actually do this now. It turned it into a thing I can do. And RasPBX makes it really a thing you can do, because all you got to do is flash the SD card, put it on there, and you're on, and you're ready to go. You turn on the Pi, you flash this SD card, and you're ready to go. So I'm not going to go over all this, but if you do want to check it out, there's like 50 pages of documentation about how you install it, how you set the admin password, how you log in, how you get, I don't know, your firewall configured, how you enable audio codecs, how you enable automatic updates. There's a lot there, but you know, you guys aren't going to be, you know, doing all that tonight, or maybe at all. But you know, I just want to kind of explain to you what my process is. So you install this, you boot it up, you go PBX on your LAN, and you'll see this FreePBX administration button, and you click on that, and you log in. And here we are. This is the landing page of my FreePBX system. I took a screenshot of it. I don't have it on, you know, here. The internet's kind of slow. I'm glad I took screenshots instead of trying to do a VPN into my house. But this is a screenshot from running on my LAN. You can see the system overview, news, statistics, and there's this big red button up here that says apply config. The one thing I can tell you about this is if you use RasPBX or FreePBX and you don't press that button, you're going to be having trouble, because basically that big red button there is a lot of pain if you don't know about it. You press that and it writes all your configuration files that you configure here, and until you do that, nothing you do is live. So you could set up 50 different extensions, you could set up a trunk, you could set up call waiting, hold music, all your stuff, wake up calls, everything, and you'd be all the way along the way. Why is it not working? Why do I not see anything? And it's because you need to press that button, and it's always there. That's the other thing. So you never really know, you know, have I applied the latest config? You navigate from one page to another. You log out and log in, it's still there, you know. And so a lot of the time I've run into problems with that. I set something up and it's not there. So if you take anything away from this presentation, remember to hit that button if you decide to do this.
And one good thing about that is it keeps your active phone calls still active.
It does, yeah. Yeah, you can do it when it's offline, you know, when it's not like, that is the thing, you know, that is why it does it. You know, it's because you don't want to like apply something while you're half done, you know, you want to do it when you're fully ready, you know. So
it'll disconnect if you apply and make a change that
It usually won't disconnect anybody. You just make your changes and it'll apply and nobody's none the wiser.
oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And so now I'm going to talk about the extensions. So remember I was saying like originally you'd have physical copper wires going everywhere, you know. Well, in here you define all your extensions in software, and they can be plugged in directly to the network, or you know, they can be wireless, or they can live on your iPhone, or you can have like an app that does it. It doesn't actually need to be real hardware. And so I'm just going to give an overview of what I've got here. There's more options than I know what they are, honestly, but I'll tell you what I know. So each individual room in my house, I got a downstairs bedroom, a game room, living room, upstairs. You guys can read. So anyways, each one of these things has a phone number, and the extension that I put in there is what you dial to actually ring the phone. And so if you're on this system, you can go call like my game room by dialing 1-2. And I just figured out, you know, I do it the same way that hotels are, you know, like floor, room number. I don't have a lot of rooms in my house, and I certainly don't have like 50 floors. So that's why I decided I'll just make it real simple, 2-digit phone numbers. I'm working on trying to create an AI assistant after I saw a demo that you guys had put up. It was actually your demo, I think, where you had the voice assistant that was going, and you used the portal lady, you know, to do text to speech and speech to text. And I was like, I want to do that, you know. I want to have somebody I can call up and I can talk to, and it's an AI, you know. I thought that would be awesome. I never figured out how to do it, but I've been working on it. So anyways, you got all this stuff here. They can be real phones, they can be virtual ones, like my gaming computer's on extension number 23, and like this phone over here is downstairs, so when I'm playing video games, my girlfriend, I can call her up because she's on the TV downstairs, I'm on the computer upstairs, and then I'm just talking to her and we're playing the game together. And then I can patch in all the other audio that I want. It's awesome. But you set all these things up and it gives you essentially a username and password. It's not called a username and password. It's like an account number and a realm and a secret and all these other things, but it's essentially a username and a password. And you use that along with the IP address of your RasPBX instance to connect it up to it. And once you do that, it like registers you with the network and says, hey, this extension is live. Now, one of the things that I'll just talk about real quick is that if you remember AIM back in the day, or AIM as they called it, if you sign out of this, if your phone is offline, it does not like queue it up for later. There's no like sending you, like calling you, and then when you plug it in, hey, here's, like it'll ring later, It's got to be online. So one of the reasons that having a phone app for it isn't so great is because if you have a gateway server that's like always on and listening for stuff and can push notifications to your phone, that's cool. But if you're trying to like sign in and run this, it needs to run constantly on your iPhone, and that's a battery drain because the connection's always open. You're always needing to be there to get stuff. It doesn't push it to your phone. So that's one thing I noticed. But anyways, we're going to go to trunks, which is how you actually call out of your internal system and go to like other phone numbers, other trunks, other instances of FreePBX that your friends might have. These are kind of static routes if you know your routers, which I don't. And so anyways, the idea is that you set up a route over here in your trunk and you say like, you have a dial plan as well, which they get kind of technical, but it's kind of like the idea that if you've ever been in a big office building, you pick up the phone, they say dial 9 for an outside line, and then you press that, and then you enter your phone number. That's kind of what a dial plan is. It like listens for certain things, patterns like a phone numbers, and then it routes it based off of those. And so what I did was I set one up so that if you press 1 and then you enter a phone number, like a 10-digit phone number, or if you like dial a 9-digit phone number, I just send that through the trunk, and then it kind of like, my trunking provider is called FlowRoute. There's a lot of different ones that you can get, but like you have a trunking provider, and so then it'll go to them. They'll connect you to the outside, and so that's kind of how it works. But yes, all the trunks are like they go somewhere else, and you do, yes. I'll show you, actually. So basically, this is the company I use, but this is just an example. They got so many, I just happen to use this one because it's cheap, and boy, is it cheap. So you want to have a phone number yourself. How much do you think a real phone number costs? You go to AT&T, they'll say like $20 a month, unlimited calling, You go talk to Verizon, it's like 30, 40, $50 a month for a cell phone number. It's not for the numbers. The numbers only cost 50 cents a month. Like, if you wanted to have 100 phone numbers, that would only cost you $50 a month. And you could have them all going to your house if you wanted. Be a little bit weird, but you could do it. And that's the thing. To get a phone number, you can just go into a place like this. You could say, I want a phone number that ends in 1234 or something. And then you'll find out none exist, on the open market. But there might be some, and the people get all these crazy novelty phone numbers, like all twos or whatever, or 8675309. That is the number for Ben Franklin Plumbing, I think. Anyways, that's the one I got confused. But you can just search and then you can find any phone number you want. You say, hey, I want this for a month. You pay 50 cents and it's yours. And then you can do whatever you want with it. You can send calls, you can send texts. Like there's some government regulation, you know, but like when you get spam numbers, it's like people are buying up these numbers in mass and then they're using them and they don't care, you know. So there's high potential for abuse as well. But I'm going to show you what the prices are. So it's pay as you go. There's no, like, I put $40 on this thing 2 years ago, and I'm down to about $20 right now after 2 years of having it. And it's 0.005 cents per minute for like inbound calls. So if somebody calls you and they're talking to you, 0.005 cents a minute. It's not bad, really. And for the outgoing calls, it's 0.0083 cents. So it's not even 8 cents a minute. It's, you know, 0.8 of a cent per minute. It's crazy low expensive. So if you want to have a home phone system on the cheap, this is the way to do it. Especially if you're not expecting to have that many calls, you know, because it's pay as you go. Now, one thing I will talk about here, which is a little bit of a gotcha, and I only learned this by like reading up on all this, is 911. So you do not get 911 by default. That is a premium paid service, kinda, and it costs you $1.39 per phone number, or $1.50 or so per number per month. So if you have 150 of those phone numbers, it might cost you $75 a month to have 150 phone numbers, but then you're going to get killed in the 911 charges, you know, every month. Or you could choose to not have 911. But what happens if you choose to not have 911 and there's an emergency and you call 911 and it does go through your trunk out to 911? They got to find you. And what you're paying money for here is to actually tell them through a system that's operated by the government where you're calling from, because they don't know, you know, there's no like trace of physical phone copper lines to your house. You know, you could do this from anywhere. You could cloud host this thing. You don't need to host it on a Raspberry Pi. So how do they know where you're calling from? They find out because you tell them, and you pay them $1 per month or so to do that. But the thing is if you call them and they got to try and find you and it's an emergency and stuff, they're going to charge you $95 per call. So it's a bit of a gotcha. Like, I don't pay that right now, but I'm also expecting not to have an emergency at my house. So I'm living dangerously, I guess. You know, I can always use my cell phone and then it won't cost that much. But, you know, if you were serious about it, you're a business, you're a hotel or something, pay that money, you know, like you don't want to be charged $95 every time somebody calls 911. So anyway, that's just kind of a gotcha that I found out about as I was doing this. So let's talk a little bit about these phones. I was supposed to, oh, there it goes. It was supposed to animate, and it does animate. This was also a thing that PowerPoint was like, hey, you'd probably like this, you know? So I was like, okay, I'll go with it. So if you were going to connect the phone here that's ringing off the hook, like this one, you would use a device called an analog telephone adapter. Now, these are called ATAs, and I'm just going to show you the one that I bought. It looks a little bit like this, but there are other ones. Like, there are a whole bunch. You know, everything I've shown you, there are hundreds and hundreds of these things out there that you can go out and buy. So I'm just happy to show you the ones that I have experience with. So these basically, you plug in the phone to them, and then you plug them into your Ethernet, and now your phone is online. But it's not quite as simple. None of them have Wi-Fi that I've found. I haven't found a single one that has Wi-Fi, and I wanted to have Wi-Fi for mine in my living room because I didn't want to have like a big, you know, like line going all the way over to my closet. So I ended up getting a Wi-Fi gateway that plugs in there, like that bridges the connection and then goes into the Ethernet and then goes into the phone. But that's what you'll need to do if you want to make these wireless. There are other ones that are, like that one actually has Wi-Fi built in. But this is kind of a diagram of how it works. You got a phone company, goes to the wall jack, goes to your PBX, but goes to your analog phone. But what I'm trying to explain here is these two ports. You got one that says FXS and the other that says FXO. And if you get a cheaper one, it's only FXS. So what these are, and I don't know what that stands for other than the S and the O part. S is for subscriber. So that's like the, endpoint over here, the phone. And O is for office. And so if you have something plugged into the O port and it's supposed to plug into the S, it's not going to work. But just know O is for like upstream, go into the office, and S is going towards, your phone. And there's a few cool things that you can do about that, and I'll get to it. But what type of phones can you use with this? Well, you can use wall phones like I was talking about. You can use fax machines. You can use game consoles, and even old school PCs, they're never obsolete. And so the thing is like you can put all of this equipment on an analog telephone adapter and still connect to the internet. You could use something that does like an ISP emulator, and you could actually simulate dialing up to the internet, and you can get online with things that were, dial up only. You can even receive faxes over this. But the thing is, uncompressed audio is totally obsolete, and you're not going to have the best time with this if you stick with the default options. You need to make sure that you have the highest quality audio that you can, because all this old equipment here was set up to use analog telephone lines for dialing in. And when they compress it and compress it and compress it, you don't get the full speed that you used to. There's no 56K over this anymore because it's compressed and it's digital. And so you got to slow it down or get higher quality codecs to send the information over. And you could slow it down to 300 baud and it'll be pretty reliable. It'll just be really, really, really slow. I don't know how fast I've been able to get it done, but I have an old computer, an old Mac from the 1990s, and it's plugged in via modem emulator, and it does it at a very, very slow rate. But it works, I'm able to call up all these services kind of, over the internet. And some people really do still have plain old phone lines connected with BBSs connected to their computers. And you can have 4 different people calling in at once. And it's really cool. Some people still do that. And I don't know, you can't really do it much anymore, but if you're really looking to nerd out, you can do that. Now, one other thing that I was going to talk about is what can you use the FXO port on this thing for? It's not just for plugging in all the way to the phone company. One thing you can use for that is you can plug in, and I got this thing from the internet. You can get this thing that is a Bluetooth adapter, a Bluetooth headset adapter that plugs in over analog telephone lines. And if you plug that into your FXO port, then you don't need any of this stuff that I was just talking about for FreePBX. You can actually use one of these to make phone calls as a Bluetooth headset for your iPhone. So your iPhone becomes your ISP, basically. It becomes your phone system. And then when your phone rings, your actual phone will ring. I did that, and I thought it was going to be so cool. And then I stopped doing it immediately. And the reason why is because I'm cooking dinner, somebody calls, I got to run over there, hey, not all progress is bad. I got a phone in my pocket. Why not just keep it there, But I was thinking, oh, this will be so cool. And one thing you can do with these types of devices is I was able to call up Siri. So I'd dial ** on this thing. It would reach Siri, and I'd say, hey, Siri, turn off the lights or whatever. I'd better not say that too loudly. She's listening, and all the lights in my house will just go off. And then my girlfriend will call, be like, hey, why am I in the dark? Oh, boy. Yeah, the house is haunted. So anyways, but yeah, no, you can call Siri. It was really, really neat. And so And then I stopped using it because it was way too much of a hassle. But there are a few other things that you can do. But before I get to those, let's talk about these phones, the new school phones that were built with new technology in mind, IP or VoIP phones. Anyways, as far as the ones with these in mind, you've got a ton of different type. You've got ones that run Linux. Hey guys, Linux user group. You got ones running Android, which is really, really funny to see. You got a desk phone that runs Android. Like, okay, we're coming full circle. You can go on Discord on there, like you can go on Slack on your Android desk phone, I kind of want one, actually. It seems like it would be pretty sick. But anyway, we got whatever Cisco makes. I don't know, but everybody who's ever been in an office building has seen these, They're still used all over the place, but they're like proprietary. And you've got these cordless ones, which I've got. You've got all sorts of different types of things. You've even got apps, like I was saying. You've got ones for iOS. You've got ones for the computer that you can use to make phone calls, all sorts of stuff. And due to the nature of these protocols, it's kind of an open system. It's kind of like how IRC or, well, not AIM, I guess, but AIM kind of was. Everybody reverse engineered it. So you can plug into all these different things and get them all online. But there's also VoIP things that you might not expect, including speaker systems, including video doorbells, including alarm systems. So there's a lot of things that run on the network that you might not expect. Those blue emergency boxes you'd see in the parking lot, they're out of order. They say, please don't have an emergency at this location. It's like those are running VoIP as well. IP speaker systems like I'm showing here, they'll do multi-room music just like Sonos might, but they're usually business oriented. And the cool thing is you can interrupt them. So like if you're paging somebody in the store, clean up in aisle 3, you can press a button and it'll interrupt the music and you could start speaking over the loudspeaker. Now, also in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, you have the bell that rings at the end of everyone, maybe not college, but high school, you have the bell that rings at the end of everything. That is a VoIP system as well. So you'd press the button, it would go, it's ringing all these different endpoints and barging in on them is kind of the way that it works. And technically, I don't have any pictures of this, but the way that works in FreePBX is that you make this thing called a dial group. I think that's what it's called. And you can set it up to ring, like if I dial a certain phone number, it'll ring all my phones, or just the ones downstairs, or just the ones upstairs. You can kind of create an amalgamation of the way that your phone system might be if you were to just go out and buy like one of those ones that has multiple handsets. You bring it home, it has one base station and 10 of these or whatever. So kind of works that way, but you can make it so that you can barge in on stuff. You can listen in to somebody's call if you're being a creep or something like that, or you can just interrupt anything that's going on and just start speaking, like even if they don't answer the call. And you can even do it over speakerphones. So what I do in the morning when I have guests showing up at my house and they're staying in my guest room is so I will wake them up in the morning and I'll say, good morning, guests. Today we're going to be serving, scrambled eggs with cheese in the kitchen. Come on down, enjoy it. And today's day plan is blah, 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 blah. I can just, and then they're like, oh, wow, I had no idea, that you had this system here. This is kind of neat, Some of them have said that anyways. Somebody's gone on record saying they liked it, after I spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on all this stuff. But there's all sorts of cool things you can do. But let's take a look at one phone in particular. Let's look at this one. It's called the Fanville H5W. And the fact that's a weird brand name means it's Chinese. And it's also real cheap. And it can do a lot of stuff. Like I was talking about how FreePBX has lots and lots of options. This has just as many options. Like, look at how many things are on like the basic setup page. I don't have most of them filled in. I don't know what they do. If I were to like put a randomizer on this thing and I were to try to work backwards, to try to like randomize every setting and figure out how it was doing, I'd give up because there's way, way, way too many things here. Like, this is just one page. There are many tabs, many pages. And so if you've ever set up a wireless router, you'll be familiar with this type of web page, though. They got a lot of options, and it looks more like a Linksys one from the 1990s or something like that, early 2000s. But I will talk about some of the stuff. This page here is where you register your line, and every VoIP phone that I've seen has something like this, and they kind of need it. It uses a protocol called Session Initialization Protocol, SIP, and SIP. And when you saw earlier when I was talking about flow route, it uses SIP trunking, and that is not carrying any voice stuff. Like, there's no voice or video or anything that goes over SIP. It is just a initialization protocol. It tells you, hey, I'm going to start a session. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. I'm going to connect these two things. It's the type of thing that AT&T dreamed of in the 80s and 70s when people were using their voice lines, to exploit them. And so you fill out this information based off of what FreePBX gives you. And really what I did here was the username, the display name, the authentication name, they're all the same. They're the phone number that you've set up for your extension. The realm and the register address and the server name, those are all the same. They're the IP address of your RasPBX. You type all those things in, and then you get a password that they generate in FreePBX. You copy, you paste, it's there. If you're doing it properly and you remember to press that big red button, it'll say registered, and then it'll show your phone number right across the top of the screen, and you're on the network. You can do whatever you want to do. It's great. So if you have phones, say I had the power adapter here, which I conveniently forgot, and you wanted to connect this up to my home phone system, you can actually set up VPN on here. They use stun and turn, and I didn't look those up because I was finishing this thing up last night and I didn't have enough time. But stun and turn are the protocols that they use to do NAT hole punching. So, like, if you're trying to make a call from somebody to somebody else and they're behind a router or they're behind a double NAT or whatever, like Alex was talking about, a double NAT, they can use these protocols to kind of punch through the NAT so that you can get around any firewalls that you need to so you can connect the call. And then there's all this codecs settings down here. There's also under the phone settings, there's also codecs, and we're going to talk about those in a second. I'm no expert on codecs, but I will explain a few things. Oh yeah, these are some of the other slides, but basically you just take the information from FreePBX, you copy, you paste, and you're online. So now let's talk about some of the common settings. Oh man, yeah. As you can see, there's lots and lots of them. Talking about like automatic hang up, silent rings, intercoms, what's the emergency call number? And I just realized the emergency call number is probably the Chinese emergency call number because these are from China. And country codes, hotline delays. There's so many different things, but I'm just going to show you then the audio settings, and this is kind of where we get to codecs. So if you can believe it, they've been working on, they're not using MP3s. When you call people up, they're not using M4As, they're not using FLAC, they're not using, the codecs that you typically associate with music. Instead, they're using ones that are voice codecs, and they have been around for a long time. They were first published in the 1970s, over 50 years ago. 1972 was when they started publishing these digital audio codecs, and they kind of originally, I watched a Tom Scott video that explained some of this stuff, but originally the reason that they did all this compression and they did audio codecs at all was because they wanted to fit more calls on the phone lines. So what they did was they took the range of voice that was like optimal and they compressed everything to that. And because they compressed everything to such a small like bandwidth, then they shifted everything over and they were able to stack multiple calls at the same time like a radio would. And so that eventually, like when we had cable internet, you were able to get like, and cable TV, we were able to like get tons and tons and tons of data going through those copper lines, you know. But kind of the idea with this was that they'd compress everything, shift it over, and then right before it got sent off to your phone, they'd unshift it. So then it would be compressed audio, but it would be like, you know, you aren't hearing other people's calls. And one thing that was kind of interesting, just an anecdote that I heard about, y'all ever familiar with the company, the cell phone company Sprint? They weren't always a cell phone company. They were called US Sprint originally. And they, you know what their logo is? It's a pin. And as a kid, I never understood that because they didn't explain. Oh, is that a question?
Yeah, Ben has a question.
Okay.
Oh
ahead.
no, I didn't have a question. I was just trying to react.
Okay.
You have the button push.
Oh, okay. I can't see any reacts on my screen, so I'm sorry. All right, but yeah, so US Sprint, they have a pin as their logo. Why do they have a pin as their logo? They're a phone company. They weren't